Hello, and welcome to the Agile Dashboard podcast on LinkedIn Live, sponsored by Duke Corporate Education, providing foresight for leaders. Today, I'm very excited that our special guest is Scott Walker, who is the CFO of Aetna, a CVS healthcare benefits division company. Scott, welcome to our show.
Thanks, Joe. It's great to be here with you.
So our show on the Agile Dashboard is all about helping leaders understand what's next in their organization and also to take a forward-looking view into the marketplace and to make sure that the organizations are capable in an agile way of responding to those market conditions. And I think CVS illustrates that, and I think we're going to hear some really interesting things from Scott. The other thing I'm very excited about is Scott and I co-authored an article which appeared in this month's issue or this quarter's issue of Dialogue magazine, talking about the strategic CFO. And Dialogue is the thought leadership magazine offered by Duke Corporate Education, has about 1 million readers on a quarterly basis. And we encourage you to check it out. But specifically, we're going to talk about the emerging CFO's role in transformation and how the job of a CFO is changing over time. And as we've been working with Scott and CVS, he's had some really interesting ideas on transformation, and I wanted to start to share them with us here on this podcast. If you do have any questions as we're going along, feel free to enter them into the chat, and Scott will be able to talk to those as well. We also will have two panelists joining us here today, Vishal Patel, who is the head of North America for Duke CE as a global partner and global managing director. And we also have Scott Coher from Geisinger Health System, who's going to be on the call joining us as well. So Vishal and Scott will be joining us in a few minutes. So I'm going to start with Scott Walker of CVS. And first, I want to kind of dive right into one of the core concepts of the article. So one of the most intriguing things when we started working together is, as a CFO, you don't just jump into the numbers. You actually have 3 questions and 3 models that you look for to understand any business. And I think this is practical for anybody. So can you help us understand the approach that you take to understand a business?
Sure, Joe, I'd be happy to. And I think over the past many years, the CFO role has really transformed from being kind of that back office CPA controller type closing the books to a much more strategic advisor consultant. And I think any good CFO who wants to have a voice at the table and earn the trust and respect of the management team really needs to get deep into a solid understanding of the business fundamentals. And for me, when I study companies or businesses, or whether I do advisory work or board work, or certainly the role that I play as CFO of Aetna, or when I'm looking at acquisitions, inorganic growth, typically people want to present to me as the CFO the economic model. And I'll stop them politely and ask them to start at the very front of the bus, which for me is the business model. So for me, there's 3 main models that I like to really study and ask probing questions around to make sure I have a strong understanding of the business. There's the business model itself, the operating model, and the economic model. And I'll give you a couple of kind of questions that I ask at the very front of the bus around the business model. First, how do you define your customers? What are their unmet needs? Or if their needs are being met today, what are we doing that's different and or unique as it relates to disrupting us from our competitor profile? Those are some very basic business model questions that really helps you narrow in on how a company or how we need to define ourselves through the customer profile. And you can have different customer profiles around segmentation, given geography, given industries, given a variety of factors. But if you don't really understand your customer and their needs or their unmet needs, and what you can do differently to differentiate or dislodge competitors and take market share, you probably have a difficult conversation around the operating model and the economic model. As you move into the operator.
Sorry to interrupt. Can I just ask you really quick? How good are people articulating the business model? Is that something that is easy for people to do, or do they struggle?
It's a great question. It's I'd say I think it varies. Sometimes I'm working with more younger in career general managers who might be running smaller functions of our business, and sometimes they're on the more sophisticated tenured side who really have asked themselves these kinds of questions for many, many years as they've moved themselves through functional roles into general manager roles. So it varies based on a variety of factors, but it gets them thinking as a good advisor or consultant, as a CFO to the businesses, as a 75 billion diversified Aetna business, it really helps people understand, because you have to have the outside in orientation. You have to understand and be obsessed with what your customers need and want from you. And if you can't define who your customer is and ultimately do that very thoughtfully and carefully, then you're not going to understand their needs or their unmet needs or their competitor profile, or how then you kind of expand the pond, if you will, to think about the needs that they will have now and what their needs may be in the future. So to answer your question, I think it varies depending on the maturity of the individuals we're working with, who are general managers or CEOs of the businesses.
And once they articulate the business model, then you move to the operating model?
That's right. So once they can define to me clearly who their customer is, what the customer's needs are, what the unmet needs are, what we're going to do differently around where we would then want to disrupt or dislodge and or differentiate to grow market share, then I get into the operating model. And I'll ask questions about how then, once you've defined your customer, how do you organize and align your team? How do you deploy capital? How do you think about resource allocation? How much of this is differentiation do you need to own versus partner? What's the vendor strategy? And therefore, you can get really deep into the what I'll call the operating model. And the operating model also includes the governance and the management process. How then do you look at the leading and the lagging indicators to ensure that you understand enough what's going on deep within your operating metrics, kind of month in and month out. So you tie the customer to the org design, alignment, decision rights, accountabilities, what you want to own, what you want to vendor, how you want to partner, where you want to spend your capital and energy and time and resources. Because if someone's going to tell me that their differentiation in the very front of the business model relates to the customer service experience, but when I look at the operating model and we've outsourced that, there's a disjoint for me on saying, well, we're saying one thing, but we're not owning the experience and therefore influencing how we want that customer to perceive us, if we think that's really a competitive advantage and something we want to own versus have subcontracted with.
And then I assume you go to the economic model to figure out if it makes financial sense, right?
That's exactly right. It's always good to have a business model that you believe in, an operating model that correlates to your business model. But if you don't have an economic model that HUNs, i.e. doesn't achieve your hurdle rate or doesn't exceed your weighted average cost of capital, doesn't achieve target margins, then you have a hobby. And hobbies, from my perspective, are not, they might be fun, but I'm a capitalist by nature, and I'm the CFO of a very large diversified business, and we have shareholder obligations. So for me, I have to constantly remind folks that we have to deploy capital in accretive ways. We have to make sure that we achieve in excess of our weighted average cost of capital and achieve our target margins to make sure that we can remain viable and a going concern to reinvest back in the business and keep doing our job effectively. So for me, those are the three basic models, and you can have hours and hours of conversation toggling between them. But for me as a CFO, I have to get intimate with each of those business models to try to be effective in my job.
So a little over 2 years ago, it looks like that's when CVS acquired Aetna to become CVS Health. So it implied in that question is that you basically saw as CVS Health a shift in the marketplace. And can you put in the context of either the business model, the operating model, what needed to be created, what needed to be changed to basically go forward with that model?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it's been 2 years now since the combination of the businesses took forth. It's the largest healthcare transaction in history. We're really proud of what I'll characterize. We're in a new and unique spot. When you step into the ranks of a Fortune 5 company, there's two things that are really become relevant very quickly. First and foremost, your reputation, your brand, and your perception. Everything we do, every release we send out, every action we take is watched in a different way. That doesn't mean CVS Health as a standalone company or Aetna as a standalone company weren't relevant in the respective industries or sectors in which we played, but as a combined company, as a Fortune 5 company, I'd say we're in a different neighborhood. The houses are bigger, the grass is greener, the shrubs are all cleaned up. And that image and reputation is really, really, really critical to make sure that you maintain. Second is performance. It comes right down to the fundamentals. You've got more eyes and ears watching and listening to everything you do. And therefore, the actions that we take have to be very thoughtful, and they have to be very clear and very precise. And therefore, decision-making, logic, data, and facts, and a good management and governance process is critical for us to deploy across a much more complex, diversified company. But the combination genesis comes about due to the fact that we don't believe that the healthcare system today is working effectively for our nation. It's too bifurcated, it's too disjointed, it's not relevant, it's not local, it's not accessible, it's not personal, and it's fragmented in many different ways. We also see the confluence occurring around significant changes in the regulatory activities. And therefore, scale and size does matter in meaningful ways. And we think that the combination of assets that we now have, being really local with 10,000 stores, being really relevant in people's community, being very personal, the creation of health hubs that allows us to really start to build long-term lifetime relationships with our customers, really becomes a different way in which the healthcare system, we believe, is going to look. And we're excited about the start of this long journey. We're in the early innings, but there was a lot of discussions, well before the combination of what we thought the healthcare system really needed to look like. And we believe personalization, local, convenient access that's affordable is going to be what trumps in the healthcare sector.
And by the way, that last statement of just such a clearly articulated business model that serves the broken model in the marketplace is exactly the type of thing that we need to start with. So I really appreciate you sharing that. And also it's exciting in a way that you just had the CEO of Aetna, or head of Aetna, is now the CEO of CVS Health. That's got to be exciting. And how is she accelerating this vision?
Yeah, no, Karen, I'm really excited for Karen. Obviously, I've had the chance to work very closely with Karen for the last 3 years since rejoining Aetna. I also knew Karen when I was at Pricewaterhouse as an auditor, and she was an executive at Cigna, which was one of my clients. So I've had the pleasure to really have known Karen and worked closely with Karen now for some time. I think Karen is absolutely the real deal. I think the knowledge she brings around managed care is going to really help us accelerate the definition of the business model. How do we want to define our customers? What are their unmet needs? Or if their needs are being met today, what do we want to do differently? And she's a great operator as well. She's got very, very large shoes to fill. Larry Merlot has had a great vision of bringing the combination of these companies together. He's done a tremendous job as the CEO for the last 10 years, and he's had an incredible track record with this company for, I think, almost 40 years as a CVS colleague. And he's really shaped a lot, and he's been incredibly courageous. If you think about some of the decisions that CVS made, whether that's the name change, whether to call it CVS Health and make a real declarative statement that health is what this company stands for. That's then followed by the decision to throw several $1 billion worth of revenue out the door with putting tobacco on the side and saying that's not what we stand for as a company. Tackling some of the opioid issues that we've tackled head on, and some of the image issues around how we want people to be perceived in our retail environment and in our retail stores. So some really, really courageous decisions and choices by Larry, and I commend him for being really kind of a strong CEO with a strong conviction of what it is the company stands for and what our value and brand and reputation need to be.
What's interesting is our CEO, Michael Chavez, has written a book about corporate purpose, and McKinsey's been all over this recently. It almost sounds like you guys have been walking that walk for a while. It's so clear about what you stand for, and I imagine that's just a great, shining star for the employees to understand what they can and can't do.
You're absolutely right, Joe. I think with that level of clarity. For one thing to have, and we had an incredible chairman and CEO in Mark Bertolini for a number of years within Aetna, and he had a really clear vision about how we treated each other, how we treated people, how we treated our providers, brokers, employers, and ultimately the member, patient, and consumer. And that North Star was really, really clear to us. And we had a relationship with CVS Health for 10 years because they were our pharmacy benefit management company. So we've known a lot about them, their company, their culture, and the people. And there was really great alignment and a lot of synergies when you think about bringing two company cultures together like that. But it is incredibly powerful when you know why you exist as a company, the purpose. And when you have 300,000 people that wake up every day and understand why you exist and what your purpose is and what your objective is, and then a very strong disciplined business model to define your customer, how we organize and align ourselves to get the job done for our customers, that creates an economic model that we think is sustainable long term. That becomes a very, very powerful competitive asset. But when you've got 300 people that wake up every day with a clear purpose that are willing to do just a little bit more for your company, that is a huge competitive asset.
Yeah, and Angela Duckworth would be proud, because when you say a little bit more, that suggests grit in the organization. But I want to get to the second part of our article as well, because the other thing is that your role as a CFO seems to be going further, because you're going through a big transformation. Because at the end of the day, I think Wall Street looks at the behemoth that's been put together as three businesses. I mean, you got your traditional CVS retail store, you have the big distribution healthcare side, and then you have the Aetna insurance sort of data side. And you're putting those together in transformation. And you, as one of the leaders of this, have adopted a different view than what most CFOs have been as you go through a transformation. So I'd also like you to kind of talk to me about leading that transformation and some of the things that you're doing differently to help accelerate this process as a CFO.
Sure. And it's, as I mentioned, we're in early innings, and it's fun. We are working around the clock really to transform the way the healthcare delivery system looks, and we're all passionate about why we exist and what we need to then go do to do that. Many companies have started this effort to really transform into something that hasn't been seen before. And if you look back at some surveys that I've studied around this, companies that have really radically changed their business model, operating model, and economic model have done so with a few things in mind. First, that they've created a higher purpose. They have a North Star. They have a calling. This is why we do what we do. It goes to the conversation we just had. There's a really clear purpose on the fact that something's not working effectively for our constituents, our members, our patients, our consumers, or our nation. In our case, as a national health services company, and we rally around that. That brings the energy. That brings the excitement. That brings the catalyst for the change that we need. Second, we're companies that do this are not afraid to let go of the past. We have an insurance company. We're a 165-year-old insurance company in Aetna. There are probably people at the company who are still doing the same job they did, who are 165 years old, who are doing underwriting, pricing, management of risk. Those fundamentals are really important to maintain, but the company has to begin to pivot. It's not good enough to hold on to the old business models. It has to start to transform. And we need more people who are interested in getting to that next level of success and identifying what the new business model looks like without losing the credibility of being a really good insurance company or a pharmacy benefit management company or a retail company. But in 5 years from now, that's not how we want to be viewed. We don't want to be viewed as an insurance company, a pharmacy benefit management company, or a retail company. We want to be viewed as a personal, local, holistic care, integrated, tying logistics together, servicing communities in which people live for the delivery of care and care management. But we can't lose sight of the fundamentals of being an insurance company, a PBM, and a retail company. That's just not how we want to be perceived in the future. So that second theme of not being afraid to let go of the past, but respecting the disciplines that got you where you are. Third is this concept of leveraging core capabilities to enter new growth markets. So we set goals for ourselves to say X amount of our revenue in 2022 and beyond needs to come from new products, new services, and new experiences. That's how you start to force the company to say we have to start to put new things into the market and not rely on the past business model to generate growth for us, because we know those business models may be under pressure, or we don't believe that that's the right way to think about the future. I'd say the fourth real big area is about technology, really leveraging the digitization of your business. We are in a new era, a new time. It's not linear as it relates to how technology is changing businesses. It's exponential. And companies that can't adapt and can't figure out how to use technology to enable their businesses to work more effectively aren't going to make it. There's just too much out there. As an old school insurance company, as an old school insurance CFO, I've had a lot to learn around the cloud and around getting off of managing, maintaining CPU and DASD and mainframe activities, and just how business process reengineering through things like Lean and Six Sigma and DMAIC models are going to improve the process, but doing so with using technology as a lever to advance items. And then lastly, you can't identify an area of individuals and say, it's your job to create innovation. Innovation has to come from every functional area within our company to make sure that we ultimately meet the needs of the consumers we want. It can't be relegated. No, the same way you can't be, you can't wait, same way a CEO can't relegate the strategy definition or the human capital or the management and governance process. That is their primary job as the CEO, to manage those three. It is the entire company's job to manage and run innovation, and should not be set aside, put in a corner and said, it's your job to create the next best thing. And we're all going to run our stacks of our businesses.
So I'm going to ask Vishal and Scott to join the conversation here. But as we do as a transition, I really like all the agile things that you're talking about. And we see that with so many companies that say it. It's nice to hear that you're doing it. But I want to be specific about your role as a CFO. Because as a CFO, are you getting involved in the digital initiatives? Are you getting involved in kind of pushing this holistic view? I mean, you're not just a number cruncher, are you?
No, I'm not. As I mentioned, I don't think I could be effective as just in the back room. Although my, coming up in public accounting and being a controller and chief accounting officer by trade, I've made the pivot into finance. So I don't think anyone in CFO roles these days in large companies can be successful just running plans and forecasts and targets and closing the books. You need to get intimately familiar with the business. And so to answer your question, Joe, yes, I have learned a lot. And part of that is approaching it with a sense of humility and leaning on people who know a lot more about functional areas of expertise and asking probing questions and really asking for advice and counsel. But you have to know enough about the business and the pain points and the points of variation and defect and waste, and what you think the right outcome needs to be, and how technology and or business process reengineering or new products or distribution or what the operating model needs to look like. So you ask the right questions to get the right outcome. So intimately involved in I spend most of my time, quite honestly, even though I'm primarily responsible for the economic model at the end of the bus, I spend most of my time in the operating model. Org design, alignment, decision rights, accountabilities, management and governance process, what we want to own, what we want to outsource, vendor management, all that. That's fun for me. And that's where I spend the vast majority of my time as a CFO.
Vishal, Scott, you've been listening to this?
Yeah. No. Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Scott, I love that you spend most of your time in the operating model. And, it seems to me your organization is redefining the bounds of, what needs to be in the ecosystem to make care better. So what's not yet a part of that operating model? And I'm appreciative that I'm asking you to look into the ball and tell us what else. But it's difficult, of course, to align those things, and it's continuous, right? You're always tweaking, you're always moving, you're always pulling in and pushing out. What have you learned as you've done that? And if you feel like telling us about that crystal ball, what do you see?
Thank you, Scott. It's a great question, and you're right. We are constantly trying to move the business model farther and farther out, because we think that that's how you increase the pond, to use Ram Charan's kind of how do you think about your business? And you should never say that you're in a saturated business. Every business has the ability to grow and mature. You just have to think about it differently and segment it differently. So one thing that we really have defined as not in scope for us, quite honestly, has been the fact that we don't want to own hospitals. We don't want to own ambulatory surgery centers. We believe that the power really is in the consumer. And we want to really own the relationship with the member, patient, consumer, and help them navigate the complexities of a very broken, bifurcated, complex healthcare system. That means owning the logistics. That means understanding how to build real personal, local, and real authentic relationships with individuals through our retail environment, through our technology, through our portals, and through access to the home. And when we can do that, we can then help individuals navigate the complexities of the healthcare system, make referrals to what we consider to be high quality and appropriate sources of care, whether that's through hospitals, through ambulatory surgery centers, through specialists, multi-specialty physician groups, But there are things that we've said, brick and mortar hospitals, ambulatory surgery centers at this point in our maturity of our lifetime are not on the horizon, but tying all the logistics together, what I refer to as the old the model under Rockefeller, right? If you wanted to go, put a hole in the ground and get oil, you couldn't do anything unless he was part of that. And I'm not talking about building a monopoly by any means, but I'm talking about tying the logistics. If you wanted to refine the oil or you wanted to distribute the oil, you couldn't do that without him. Yep. And that's what we're trying to create here, which is tying the logistics together to make sure that individuals can navigate the system that's really complex for them. And we want to be those tracks, if you will, the tying that logistics together.
Yeah, I appreciate you also bringing an energy industry metaphor here. One of the things that I admire about your organization is the clarity of what's in that ecosystem and what's not. So it's almost as if you're in the energy business, but you don't have the sunk cost of a coal firing plant that you got to figure out what to do with. So that's
exactly right. There's two things when I think about my job as a CFO, there's two things I focus on, right? Which is margins and velocity. Velocity is how well do we use our working capital. And my job is always to get the maximum amount of margin based on the limited amount of working capital necessary to do so. So we try to use the same system, same platforms, same vendors, same approach, so that we don't do rework and use our working capital very effectively to improve our velocity. So margin and velocity are two metrics I spend a lot of time educating the management team on.
Yeah,
that's great.
And by the way, Scott, just to really pick up on that last one, because we talk a lot about cycle time and the importance of that in a business. This show is also called the Agile Dashboard. What are some of the metrics that you're looking at, not to understand the business model, and I understand velocity on the operating model, but what about the other metrics that you're starting to look at that are non-traditional metrics in terms of going beyond the financials to help you understand how things are doing?
Sure. I mean, in the spirit of not providing a lot of competitive intelligence as a Fortune 5, as to my earlier comment on the fact that everything we say and do becomes
just a little leading question there, Jim.
That's right. Right. One area that I spend a lot of time on lately, because I think it goes to the changing business model as a combined, integrated combination of assets that we have that I think is unique in this industry, is what I talk about as lifetime value. And to the extent now that we're talking about trying to own the relationship with the member, patient, consumer, what do we want that to mean? And what value does that bring to us over time? As I mentioned, we want to be a trusted source. We want to be local. We want to be personal. We want to build authentic relationships. Well, one of the best ways to prove whether or not you're doing that successfully, especially in a B2B or a B2B2C, because we have these consumers, individuals, and employees of employers, is to stretch the relationship. How much value are we creating to an employer when an employee comes in and says, I can't manage my healthcare if I don't have access to CVS Health and or Aetna? That's the kind of response we want to have from employees to employers and or from Medicaid individuals who go to their state and say, I really like what this company is doing to helping manage my care, and or individual Medicare participants. So how can we stretch the relationship? How can we improve lifetime value? We all know in business that when you have lifetime value, especially in healthcare, I can manage the care more effectively. I can risk adjust the risk I'm underwriting more effectively. And ultimately, I can create margin for myself, but I'm also creating a much better health outcome over time because I can manage the care and close the gaps in care much more effectively than if I had just a year relationship with Joe. I really want to learn what Joe's aspirations are for your health. I want to know what your acuities are, your conditions, and what I can do to help you on your way to better health over time.
No, excellent. Hey, Scott, I wanted to follow up with something you were mentioning earlier around asking the right questions. And oftentimes, I think when you're in your position, it's not about having the answer. It's about asking the right questions and kind of guiding the right strategic options that are out there. As you've kind of led this transformation in the health services company, what are some of the lessons that you've learned along the way? What's working, what's not working?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think no matter how many years of experience any of us have, you need to approach the job with a sense of humility. And I spend a lot of my time working with the management team on the management and governance process, because you can't manage a $75 billion diversified segment by walking the halls. It's just way too complex. So I spend a lot of time, and we have our meet weeks, every month, And I use those as the real opportunity to get deep into the fundamentals of the operating model, as well as the business model and the economic model as needed. But I think first and foremost, it's approaching it with a sense of humility. There is no way I'm going to learn or know everything I need to know about the Medicaid business intimately. And therefore, I have to ask the questions about whether or not I believe and have trust and confidence that that management team has a good management and governance process running that business effectively. So a lot of open-ended questions, a lot of probing questions, and a lot of it comes back to really reading body language, reading people's confidence and their competence in the answers that they give you. And I tell people regularly that I work with, who are my peers or people running the businesses, that I'm going to do everything in my power to study your business. And I'm going to tell you right now, if I know more about your business than you do, it's not going to end well for you. So you better be as studious at understanding your business as I am, because I'll spend the time. I will be a good student, and I will listen and I will learn. But if there's ever a spot where I know more than you, that ain't going to end well for you. It's not going to end well. So you better be studying as hard as I'm studying.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's great.
That's got to be a good lesson.
But by the way, is failure an option at CVS?
Yeah, it is. It is. We're in early innings towards transforming a healthcare system that people still haven't understood what we're trying to describe. And I think that's why you look at our market cap and our PE, it's not giving the value. It's not showing the value yet of what we know we are capable of with this combination of assets. It's like asking someone 15 years ago whether or not they would want an iPhone. They'd be like, I have no idea what you're talking about. We're asking people to try to understand what a new healthcare delivery model would look like. That's very, very different and radically shifting from what they know today. And they just can't get there yet. And we have to do a good job describing that. So we've got a lot of projects underway. We do a lot of pilots. So we course correct and we recalibrate when they're not working well. So absolutely, I don't think any company can go through transformation exercise and try to do what we're doing at the scale we're doing without having some missteps. And the goal on missteps is that you recognize them quickly. You focus on the process, not the people. My general view has been when something goes wrong, we've typically put good people in a bad process. So what did we do ineffectively or inefficiently around the deployment of capital resources that got us stuck? And it's not that you take it out on the people, you take it out on yourselves as a leader. Say we didn't give them the right process. We didn't box this in the right way. So I focus a lot more on failures on process. What went wrong? What did we learn? And how do we put better people or put the right people in a better process so that they can be successful with this? And that's part of our job as management. It's also not to put good money on bad money. If we recognize we're not doing something right, let's acknowledge it quickly and let's fail forward. Let's make sure we can pivot and correlate and course correct and get the capital and resources deployed in the most effective way.
Scott, as you think about the processes, the health is not easy, right? It just is it's a difficult navigation for even those in the business themselves. Are there some lessons learned since you've put these organizations together of how process improvement has come out? And I like in particular the clarity around the personal, the local, the convenient, and affordable. So there's a lot of room for process improvement. Most expensive health system in the world. Outcomes, somewhere in the low 30s when compared to other industrialized nations. Focusing on processes, what are some of the things that you've learned over the past couple of years?
Yeah. I mean, it's the first 2 years, as I just mentioned, we completed. There's three main areas of focus for us as a company. First and foremost was the assimilation and what I'll call the synergies. And it was to recognize the fact that we had, although it wasn't one MCO over one managed care company over another managed care companies, it was three disparate businesses: retail, pharmacy, and insurance. But there are still synergies that need to be recognized. So the first 2 years were really focused on where do we get alignment on synergies? And we made a very clear and bold statement around the value of those synergies to the external market. And we're very focused on ensuring that those synergies got realized, whether that's on formulary changes, whether that's on rebates, whether that's on core G&A, whether that's on best-in-class rates across our procurement cycles, whether that's on org design and alignment. around some of the back office functions, finance, legal, HR, IT. So we spent really the first 2 years dedicated to making sure that that first big pillar of our 3 big pillars inured the value to our company, but also to our shareholders properly. And we rang the bell, and we're done talking about synergies. The second and third are really where the meat of this is where it gets really, really hard. This is about how do we modernize the components of healthcare that need to change. And third is how do you transform the healthcare model? New products, new services, new experience. How much revenue do we expect to generate from new products, new services, new experience in 2021, 2022, 2025 to force us to put a kind of a North Star out there to say X amount of our revenue needs to be generated from new things. How do we start to then reshape and put new products? And that's where you have, to Joe's point, the failure. We're going to put new things in the market that aren't going to resonate. And we have to course correct and modify. The modernization piece is how do we tie the technology together? How do we make the infrastructure work much more effectively, much more efficiently, so that when Joe shows up as a CVS retail customer, I know everything about him. I know his acuities, I know his conditions, I know where he likes to shop, when he likes to shop, how he likes to be communicated to. I know his preferences, I know where he lives, I know his kids, I know his wife. I know about him and what his health aspirations is, so I can have a real, authentic, genuine relationship. That is years in the making. That's the modernization aspect. That's tying the logistics and the technology together, because we know Joe as a retail member, we know Joe as an Aetna member, and we know Joe as a pharmacy member. And we have to tie those logistics together to have one experience for Joe when he comes to our store and to our health hub or our Minute Clinic.
It's interesting. In our last show, we had a woman named Anna Gong who talked about sort of lifestyle management and data in motion and being much more proactive with the data. And it sounds like that's something that you guys are really trying to get to.
That's exactly right, including things like next best action. You know, if we know Joe hasn't come in and picked up his script, we're going to be pinging him. We want people to be adherent to their care plans. We want to do anything that's at our disposal to help people achieve their health ambitions. We want to ensure that we can do effectively for our nation.
Mm-hmm. So I know we are running at the end of our time here, and I do see a question in the audience. And I know, Scott, you said you're not interested in giving out too much competitive intel. So this person might be from Amazon, but they're asking about the new Amazon pharmacy launch, and just, how do you view that? So I don't know if you want to make any comments about that.
Sure. I'm happy to comment on that. I think generally I have a tremendous amount of respect for Amazon. They're a formidable company. They've obviously done some very disruptive and innovative things over time. I guess the one thing I would say about healthcare, and it goes to the conversation we were having, which is, for me, it's much more than being able to offer a mail order pharmacy benefit and considering yourself kind of in the pharmacy or in the healthcare business. We look and we have an aspiration to be able to build real, genuine relationships with individuals around their health and health aspirations. And I don't think you can do that if you don't have a physical footprint. I don't think you can do that without really good technology and a model of care or a care management system that wraps people around what their health aspirations are. Could Amazon do that? They can do anything that they want, if they set their mind and capital and resources to that. But it's a very complicated healthcare delivery system today to navigate. And therefore, I have a tremendous amount of respect for them as a company. We are very focused on our strategy, our mission, our objective, and what we believe the healthcare system needs to look like for the future.
And very rarely on these shows do we see somebody with such a clear vision of, emulating almost the Wayne Gretzky quote of, I'm going to go skate to where the puck is going. And it sounds like that's what CVS Health has really identified. And, going through a journey with a $250 billion company is truly a large transformation. And I think what we really appreciate, Scott, that you've emulated the behaviors of what a more strategic CFO needs to do on a go-forward basis. Because as you said, a lot of them, drive more the economic model. And it's just so interesting that you say, no, you don't start there, you end there. And also, I think we're seeing in the chat as well, people appreciate your idea that as a leader that you don't have to be the smartest person in the room. You don't have to know every answer, and that you are a good student. And I think that's also just very refreshing because a lot of CFOs don't have that perspective. And I just want to say thank you for that.
Yeah, you're very welcome. I mean, I wake up every day and I just have a continuous improvement mindset. There's still a lot I don't know. I've been in this industry for 26 years, and I still enjoy the work I do. It inspires me. I think waking up and working for a company that truly wants to allow people to achieve their best health is inspiring. So and my advice to people younger in careers, first you figure out the sector you want to work in. And if you can't get excited about that sector, you're not going to be successful because it's a long career and you have to manage it carefully. And you have to be energized by the work you do. So find that aspiration, that inspiration that gets you excited every day, and therefore it doesn't feel as much like work. Second is focus on the who, and then the what starts to take shape. When you start building teams, hire people who are smarter than you, that are energized, that are passionate about the industry, that are passionate about the sector, that are constantly focusing on continuous improvement, and that make you better as a leader. And then third, if you want to be a good CFO, you got to get deep into the business. You really have to study the business as hard as the business owners are going to study it. If you want to have a voice at the table, be relevant, and have a conviction about the topics you're talking about. You also need that in order to be a good advisor. If you don't understand the subject matter adequately, you can't advise and consult and be viewed as a top advisor to the management team and the CEOs that you're trying to support.
Well, I think those are very wise words. And again, I think you are an inspirational leader, which is something I appreciate being able to work with CVS Health on the journey. So on behalf of Duke Corporate Education, thank you for the work that you do, for being on this broadcast. And personally, thank you for collaborating with me on the article. I really hope that everybody gets a chance to take a look at this. We'll put a link in the chat as well to the article. If you want to read it, it's in the latest issue of Dialogue. And if you want to contact Scott or get any other information, feel free to reach out for us at dukece.com, and we'll be happy to connect you. Otherwise, thanks for everybody for listening today. Thanks for Vishal and Scott for being on our panel. And once again, thanks to our wonderful guest, Scott Walker from CFO of Aetna, CVS Health Benefits Company. And thank you for listening. Look forward to seeing you on our next broadcast. Everybody, have a great day.